thousand deaths. Usurp the heavens, break the sun, become the demon.
Akuma's Raging Demon is as terrifying as ever in Street Fighter 6. One of the most infamous super moves in fighting game history, the Raging Demon, otherwise known as the Shun Goku Satsu in Japanese, is one of the most iconic finishing moves ever conceived. And now in Street Fighter 6 we can see exactly what happens behind the scenes in all of its glory. The onslaught begins with the iconic opening line,
Die a thousand deaths,
referring to the 1,000 afterimages of Akuma beating her ass into submission. This dialogue was first seen in Street Fighter 4,
die 1,000 deaths,
continued up to Street Fighter 5, and even came back in Japanese for Tekken 7. But now we have 3 more lines of dialogue in Street Fighter 6's version, so here it is in full.
Die a thousand deaths. Usurp the heavens, break the sun, become the demon.
The second line, Usurp the Heavens, is of course referring to the iconic kanji for 10, or heaven, that appears on Akuma's back at the end of the super. This has been present in nearly every iteration of the move all the way back to Akuma's very first appearance in Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and symbolizes how Akuma has transcended heaven itself and achieved immortality. The third line, Embrace the Sorrow, is a reference to the Satsui no Hado, a dark and destructive energy source that Akuma has tapped into and embraced in order to transcend the boundaries of his own fighting abilities. And I don't think I need to explain to you what the fourth line, Become the Demon, means. Now, the Japanese version of Akuma's Raging Demon provides a more literal translation of the kanji scripture that appears throughout the super. The same scripture that we can see lined up vertically in a row at the very end of the super. Here's a rough translation in English. The Japanese kanji that accompany the very first line, 1,000 strikes in a flash, can be seen in Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, and there's even an incomplete version of it all the way back in Street Fighter EX plus Alpha. Naturally, this line perfectly encapsulates the essence of Akuma's Raging Demon, as it's always been depicted as a relentless flurry of strikes that occur in the blink of an eye. But now we have 3 additional lines of kanji that are totally brand new, and as it turns out, these writings are not ordinary Japanese kanji. Kanji are Chinese characters that have been adopted for use in modern-day Japanese written language. But the kanji that we see here in his super is a form of kanji that is significantly older, akin to classical or old Japanese writing, that gives Akuma's Raging Demon an ancient, godlike quality to it. The kanji are also arranged in something that's called Yojichikugo in Japanese, which translates to Japanese idiom in English. Idioms are expressions or phrases that convey ideas, lessons, or stories in an abstract form. Examples of this in English would be phrases like wolf in sheep's clothing and early bird catches the worm. The Japanese idioms that we see in Akuma's super originate from China. They're often used to describe various Buddhist scripture and Chinese proverbs and folktales. And they're unique in that they always follow the pattern of being depicted with only 4 kanji characters. The second line, pulling mountains off the ground, is an idiom that famously described Jiang Yu, an infamous Chinese warlord who rebelled against the Qing dynasty in 200 BC. He was fabled to have the strength to move mountains, and this idiom was actually describing him, but has now been repurposed for Akuma. The third line, Sound of Ghouls' Cries, does not have a direct equivalent, but it sounds very similar to another Chinese idiom called Gui Ku Shen Hao, which translates to Ghost's Wail and God's Howl. This idiom was used to describe a scene of great devastation or tragedy, often with a supernatural element, which would perfectly describe what's going on with Ryu's body right about now. These idioms were initially thought to be a reference to the Street Fighter Ryu Final manga, an adaptation of Street Fighter 3 which was written by Masahiko Nakahira and produced in Japan between 2007 and 2012. It comprises of 2 volumes and depicts a fairly wholesome story featuring the cast of Street Fighter 3, culminating in a showdown between Ryu and Akuma. Just before Akuma unleashes his ultimate technique, there's a full screen panel depicting Ryu facing off against Akuma just as he's about to perform the Raging Demon. 4 kanji compounds are written on each corner of the panel. Although the style of writing is different, these 4 expressions are identical to what we see in Akuma's new Raging Demon in Street Fighter 6. Pretty cool, right? Now most people would just assume that this is it, and that the characters used in Akuma's Super in Street Fighter 6 were a direct reference to this exact manga panel. But what if I told you that there was an even obscurer manga that predates this one with an even more direct reference to the phrases we see in Akuma's Super? The manga is so obscure that I don't actually know who wrote it, or what it's officially called. If anyone figures it out, let me know in the comments. I'll leave links in the description to the original manga and the Twitter thread that made the discovery. It's based on Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and was produced in Hong Kong in collaboration with Capcom around the time the game actually was officially released, in 1999. It's a full-color manga comprising of 115 chapters, and where the Ryu Final manga was somewhat wholesome, this is just brutal. Some of the depictions of violence and martial arts is incredibly visceral. I'd actually strongly recommend checking it out, it's really beautifully drawn. Now, just like the Street Fighter Ryu Final manga, it all eventually comes together in a battle with Akuma, of course. But this time, facing off against violent Ken. Ken went all 5th gear in one of the previous chapters, which is why his clothes are all white now. But anyway, Akuma is about to unleash his Raging Demon in a panel identical to the one we saw in the Street Fighter Ryu Final manga. And once again, we see 4 kanji lines on each corner of the panel. Do they seem familiar to you? They should, because they are identical to the ones used in Akuma's new Raging Demon in SF6. 1-to-1. How cool is that? It's crazy and so fucking sick that Capcom is willing to go so far back in their history and integrate such obscure references into their mainline titles, especially a part of their history that's so hidden that next to no one outside of Japan would have even heard of it until this video. But hey, now you know. And I hope this video gives you a greater appreciation for the amount of detail that has gone into this legendary Super. Let me know your thoughts on Akuma's new Super in the comments below. Do you love it, or do you prefer the classic? There is an argument to be said that the new Raging Demon loses the mystique of the original. Before, it was up to the player to imagine what happened during that 1-second flash of hits. But now we know exactly what happens. Ultimately, I think it was inevitable that Capcom would eventually want to flex their creative muscles and showcase what actually happens during a Raging Demon. They were already experimenting with this in Street Fighter V, and I think they portrayed it as faithfully as they could have. But what do you think? Would love to hear your thoughts on it down below, and stay tuned for my full breakdown of Akuma in Street Fighter 6. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.